myths of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric, from feedback to learner autonomy? We'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hello, and welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. This episode features an interview with Professor Charlie Browne. Dr. Browne has lived and worked in Japan since 1985. He is Professor of Applied Linguistics and TEFL at Meiji Gakuin University in Tokyo, and a specialist in vocabulary and reading research, especially as they apply to online learning. He also has more than 25 years' experience working as a teacher trainer and has done hundreds of teacher training workshops for thousands of Japanese teachers of English. He has written extensively on his various fields of interest, as well as creating two important new corpus-based word lists for second language learners, known as the New General Service List and the New Academic Word List. He has also engaged with research-based language learning and analysis software and websites through many presentations, seminars, and hand-on workshops conducted around the world. Matt spoke to Dr. Browne recently at his office in central Tokyo, asking him questions about a range of topics, including word lists, the readability of materials, and how to use online tools for lesson planning. Enjoy.
I'm sitting here with Charles Browne in his office at his university, and thank you for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me, I should say.
Thanks for coming over.
Just to begin, just at the very top, should I call you Charlie or Charles?
Oh, Charlie. Everybody calls me Charlie. And Charles is when you're angry at me.
And you obviously must know about the cartoon. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Charlie Browne. I grew up, being, pretty much ridiculed all through childhood. I was a pitcher on the baseball team, and whenever I'd get to third base, they'd yell, "Slide, Charlie Browne, slide," which is right from the comic strip. So I kind of grew up with that.
I was doing some Google searches yesterday, and it kept coming up with the cartoon Charlie Browne.
Well, it's good, but it's good. It made me pretty good-natured, and it's very easy for my students to remember. So no complaints.
Yeah. So maybe just to begin, we usually begin our interviews by asking our interviewee to sort of talk about their career. So I wonder if you could take our listeners through your journey.
Well, even that'll take a little bit of time, because I've been in Japan since 1985, so it was 30 plus years.
Right.
But I came here right out of college, had never been to a foreign country, was hired on what's the precursor to the JET program, called the MEF program, the Momosho English Fellow program, and came over as part. There was a group of 85 teachers. I think it's now about 6,000 on the JET program.
Really? Wow, okay.
But so it's a very small group of teachers. I went to Kumamoto, and I worked for the Board of Education down there, and it was my first time I'd ever taught. I didn't have a degree in teaching. But I was just thrown in. I was responsible my first year for 53 different junior high schools, going to a different junior high every day, teaching English, working with 3 or 4 teachers at each school. So I'd hit probably 50, 60 schools and 200-300 teachers a year. And while I was there, I became very aware very quickly of the kind of problems Japanese students have with their with learning English, and this is really informed what happened later in my career. And so after that first year on the MEF program, the JET program was formed, and I actually was the first national chairman. So when the JET program was formed in '87, I was the chairman of the program, and basically was doing the teacher training, the coordination, the orientations, the going around to boards of education around the country and trying to problem solve. And so those first 3 years really helped me to very quickly start thinking about at a macro level what the micro level problems were in the classroom, and I was looking at problems of difficulty of reading materials, the problems of the vocabulary, obviously that's a big thing for me, and problems of teacher education, lack of teacher education, I should say, and that's what I do right now. I'm at Meiji Gakuin, where I've been for the past 10 or 12 years. I'm in charge of the teacher education program. So very quickly, as an ALT on the JET program, I realized that I would have more effect on improving English education if I focused on the teachers rather than the students. So if I could just introduce, one or two good ideas to the teachers, then after I left, then they would in turn affect hundreds of students. So that was the JET program. That was 1985 to 88. From there, I went and I coordinated a chain of language schools owned by Sony Corporation called Sony Language Labs. And again, the focus was, as a coordinator, my focus was on materials development, teacher education, orientation, support. So again, sort of a focus on teachers and materials. But I started... In my years at Sony, it was a great job, and so was the job as an ALT. But I realized that my real passion was for what goes on in the classroom, and really on helping students and teachers. And what I wanted to do was to sort of work at the university level where I could maybe do some research and contribute in that way. So I went back to school and did a master's and a doctoral degree at Temple. And, almost immediately thereafter, got a job first at Kanagawa University. Then I was at Aoyama Gakuin for about 10 or 12 years. And I've been here at Meiji Gakuin for about 10 or 12 years.
Right, I see.
So in terms of the actual jobs, that's sort of the jobs I've done over the past 30 years. But inside of that, I mean, I've worked on, done so many countless other things, writing books, making presentations, developing vocabulary lists, developing software, and so on.
Yeah, no, I noticed that when I was looking at your website yesterday, and there seemed to be a lot of different things that you've done. I wanted to talk about one of those areas, if I may, which is your interest in vocabulary instruction and acquisition. And I'm wondering, I guess you kind of said back then, but what kind of sparked your interest in the area of vocabulary particularly? Well,
I think for me, the starting point was just looking at what my students were doing, looking at the high school textbooks, and realizing just how extraordinarily difficult a lot of the vocabulary words in those books were. I mean, these are books that are written for second language learners of English who only have a couple of years of English under their belt, and I was struggling with the words, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. And I thought that the vocabulary was too hard. I thought the reading, as reading materials, it was too hard, but I wasn't yet a qualified researcher, so it was just more intuition than it was something I could quantify. And that's one of the reasons I went back and started studying at the master's and doctoral degree level. So a lot of my early research was trying to quantify these things and looking at the difficulty of the reading materials and the vocabulary and so on.
Yeah. And going back to like the 80s, the mid 80s, what were textbooks like back then?
Well, not remarkably different than they are now.
Right.
I mean, if you look at a textbook from the 80s and you look at a textbook from 2018, you'll see more color. They're color versus black and white. There might be more illustrations, but even though the Ministry of Education course of study guidelines really states quite clearly that the focus of English education should be on teaching English for communicative purposes and developing students' positive attitude towards communicating in English and active learning. And they have all of those goals stated nicely in the course of study guidelines, but it's not what happens in the classroom, and it's certainly not what happens in the textbook. The textbooks are still primarily focused on grammar and grammar translation. And, if it maybe in places here and there moved more toward, audiolingual method where it's, drill and kill, but still not really embracing, the basic principles of communicative language teaching. That's the way it was in the 80s, and that's the way it is now.
Right.
I mean, there's a new course of study guidelines that is just recently out, and everybody's like, wow, this is going to change everything. But I've been through, 5 or 6 course of study guidelines, and every 5 or 6 years we say, wow, and always disappointed by what happens. So I'll believe it when I see it.
Right.
But the new course of study guideline is promising, and as always, it states the purpose is stated and the goals stated are very good ones. It's just a matter of whether or not they'll actually be implemented in the physical textbooks and in how they train teachers.
Yeah.
And that's always been a sore point for the ministry, is they'll state goals like teach English in English or teach speech and debate, but then they put basically zero money into helping teachers to have the tools to accomplish those goals.
Right. I see. But I mean, perhaps we'll come back to like the educational setting of Japan later on. But I wanted to primarily ask you today about your contributions to the area of developing word lists.
Yes, of course.
Namely the new General Service List, which I guess is an updated version of the General Service List, which was
by West,
by Mike West. And I, if I'm correct, that was originally conceived in the 1930s or roundabout, or
the Michael West's. It was basically decades of work by Michael West and a team of some of the most famous linguists in the world at the time, and partially funded by Rockefeller grants and all kinds of other monies from different governments. I think the first list was first published in 1936 as an interim list on second language for second language learners, and about 17 years later it was finalized in the what's now known as the General Service List in 1953 by Michael West.
Okay.
But you have to remember that when they were creating corpora, when they were creating, basically it had to be done by hand. They didn't have computers. So their original corpus was about 2.5 million words, and that means that they were counting every single word in every single text they had. So it was just an insane amount of work. And though I tremendously respected, and originally when I was starting in the field of vocabulary and studying under Paul Nation, that's how I became aware of the original General Service List and used it in the classroom and informed my teaching, my testing, and all of these things. But as I worked with the old General Service List, very closely, more and more in terms of materials development and testing and teaching, I realized that it was a bit old. There were a lot of, especially, it's about 2,000 words, and the second 1,000 especially had a lot of words that just do not represent, what second language learners really need. And that was the purpose of the General Service List, is to try and predict the kind of language that second language learners would be exposed to. And, there'd be words like coal and ship and sailor and, like agriculture words.
Right, okay.
And, things that were, the texts were taken from, the 1800s, a lot of them. So words that were, very, very prevalent then were in the second 1,000 words of GSL, and stuff that's occurred in our lifetimes was not reflected at all. So it's very clear, number one, on the one hand, that the corpus had to be updated. And one of the other things that is really clear is that 2.5 million words was not enough. When I think they eventually expanded it to about 5 million words, but even with 5 million words, what you have looking at the second 1,000 and third 1,000 is occurrences of, the 2,000th word and the 2,001st and 2,002nd word. They're all occurrences of 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. How do you differentiate between all those ones? You can't. It's almost random. And so what you need is a bigger corpus to really make better predictions about the value of words. And so, we, with the new General Service List, we had a very modern access to a very modern corpus, the Cambridge English corpus, which is about 2 billion words if you use the whole thing. Wow. But we didn't. There's no need to go that high. There's actually, too small is a problem, but too big presents a lot of other problems. And many of the other word lists where they're using like a 2 billion or 14 billion or 20 billion word corpus, those are actually not good lists either. So what we did is we took just about 10% of the Cambridge corpus. We took 273 million words, and that gave us about 100 times larger sample of the English language than the old general service list. So we got a much better reading on the frequencies. And because it was much more modern text, and because it was a mixture of fiction and nonfiction and learner English and also spoken English, some of the subcorpora were like television and radio and spoken English. So we sort of have I think a better representation of the kind of language that second language learners are likely to meet. And in the end, the original GSL, the original Michael West's original list gives about 80% coverage.
Okay.
We're getting with less words, because we have to talk about how you count a word, but basically with less words than the general service list, we're getting about 92% coverage. So and that was the main goal, was to modernize the corpus and to try and get higher coverage with fewer words. And because this is about efficiency. The reason people make, or many of us make word lists, and one of the reasons for making these word lists is for efficiency, efficiency of language learning. And why is efficiency important? Well, there's some really, just to put some statistics out there, there's the largest dictionary of English has about 600,000 words. A native speaker, average native speaker like you and I, after graduating from college, we'll only know about 5% of that. We'll know maybe 25 or 30,000 words of that.
Wow.
Okay, so that means 95% of the English language we're not even using. Because all these science words and medical words.
Sure.
But coming back to finishing the thought on efficiency, native speakers know 25, 30,000 words. The average Japanese college student, after studying English for a couple of years in elementary school, 3 years in junior high, 3 years in senior high, and 4 years in college, 12, 15 years. After 12 to 15 years of study, they only know 2,000 words, 2,000 to 3,000. So what we're talking about is it's not realistic to even look at the target of 25 to 30,000 words that you and I know, because even after 15 years they only know 10% of that. But the research is really clear in a couple of areas of vocabulary and reading research. And one of the things that's really clear is that in order to be able to read or listen to read English or listen to English and understand it reasonably well, you need to be able to know 95 to 98% of the words that you're reading or listening to. The efficiency of my list, the reason 92% coverage for 2,800 words is an important number, is that 92% for 2,800 words is very close to the 5,000, to the 95% that is needed to be able to read and guess from context.
Right.
So by efficiency, what I'm saying is that I'm trying to help Japanese learners get to the point where they don't have to depend on dictionaries or their teachers as quickly as possible. And the GSL was not nearly as efficient. It was a good attempt, and it's an amazing work of research that stood the test of time for 50 or 60 years. But basically, I had at my access, computers, and I have at my access all kinds of resources they didn't. The idea was to modernize and make a more efficient list that was going to benefit students and get them to that point of independence much more quickly.
Yeah, I see, I've got a couple of questions that popped into my head.
Yeah, please.
I guess my first question is I'm a little bit unsure what you mean by coverage. Could you explain what you mean by
so coverage, to put it simply, like if a text, say a page of text has about 250 words. Coverage means how many of those words do you know? Okay. And so, when I say 95% coverage, that means that on a 250 word, page that you might only, you could not know maybe 10 words, and you might be able to read and guess from context.
Okay.
Any more than that, and you wouldn't be able to. And the problem is, and this is research that I've done and others have replicated, but for Japanese high school texts, when you look at a Japanese student's vocabulary size and you look at the difficulty of Japanese high school text, they only know maybe 60%, 60 to 70% of the words on the page, which means reading is basically mission impossible. You just cannot comprehend the text because there's too many unknown words, and so there are different ways that we can get them to 95%. One of them is to teach them the high frequency words that they're most likely to meet, and that's what my word lists are. Another approach is to go the opposite way and to simplify the reading materials. And so I make free websites for what's called graded extensive reading, and so grading the reading materials so that even when you only have 1,000-word vocabulary, you can still read something at that 95 to 98% level.
I see.
And so I'm actually working on both sides of the equation, and trying to make the word lists and then tools to learn those word lists as quickly and efficiently as possible, but then also make reading and listening materials that are graded so that even when you're at a lower level, you can still read at that 95 to 98% level.
Yeah. Just before we move more into kind of word lists, the new general service word, the NGSL for short. I read an article, or I was speaking to a colleague recently, and they used the GCSL as a kind of as a base to build their research on.
What's the GCSL?
The general service list.
GSL.
GSL. Sorry.
Yeah. What did I say? Wait a minute. Is that
GCSL?
There's a lot of acronyms. Yeah. So the GSL.
Sorry, the GSL, and I remember saying to them, I think they have a new updated version now. So do you think that there's a problem that people still aren't too aware of this new research?
It takes time. It takes time. Our list has only been out for 4 or 5 years, and I present at conferences all over the place, and put out the free online tools, and try and get the word out as best I can. But it'll take time, and I look at this as a sort of a lifetime project. I mean, the GSL was out for 60 years. And I'm pretty sure for all of the, we've built 5 word lists and probably 20 tools, tools to help teachers teach the words, help students to learn the words, researchers to research using the word list, text developers to modify text based on my word list. So we're slowly and methodically building more and more word lists and more tools. And my guess is that these word lists will be around more than 60 years from now. Right. So we're taking a very long-term view of this. They're, like the original GSL. The original GSL was published in 1936, as I said, as an interim list. And so it wasn't finalized for 17 years. And so our word list as well, we don't look at them, when the GSL, the NGSL, and NAWL, the new academic word list and new general service list, were published in 2013 as interim lists. And they've already been through 2 iterations, and we're in the middle of a 3rd iteration right now. So they're always being revised. That's why I present and I ask for feedback. We talk with other researchers. We look at the research being done, and we're always trying to make improvements based on the latest possible data. And we've got 3 other lists as well, special purpose word lists. I guess the academic word list is a special purpose word list, but we also have a TOEIC word list and a business English word list and a spoken English word list. And so these various genres and various special domains, we're working on making the word list and the tools for utilizing those word lists as well. So it's the fact that people are still using the old GSL and the old AWL. I mean, Avril Coxhead is a good friend of mine, and I think the AWL is a great list. But the reason we made the new academic word list rather than using Avril's old academic word list is not because her list was bad. It was actually quite good. But her list was designed to fit perfectly with the old GSL, so there's no overlap, right? And so our new GSL was we count words differently. We use lemmas instead of word families. There's more words rather than less words. So her, we would have had to modify her list too much, and so it just seemed easier to make a new one. And we do get slightly better coverage for also just like with the GSL. But I think Avril's list is going to be around for a while, and I think it's also what's the right word? Not retroactive, but because people want to use Avril's list, they end up using the GSL because that's the only word list. The old GSL goes with her list.
I see. Yeah.
So it sort of comes with it comes with the territory. But I think the more as people look at the new general service list, I think there's a lot more people are moving over to our word list. Yeah.
So the new or the previous general service list is a kind of an umbrella list that other word lists can be made out of?
The way we've designed it is we've taken what we're calling a modular approach. And I mean, there are word lists out there where you say you did a business English list. The business English list would cover both all of the word, the early high frequency words like the and is and of and on, all the way up to the technical business words in one single list. That's one way to go. We don't believe in that. I mean, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to think about real world uses and real world needs of language learners. So even say your focus is medicine or engineering. If you studied only medical and engineering words, you might get a high score on a medical test or an engineering test, and you might be certified as a doctor in English. But when you go to talk to your patients, and when you go and try and do things in the real world, you only know medical words, so it doesn't help you that much. So what we've done is we've separated them. The new general service list is 2,800 words that covers 92% of the language you get in your everyday life. You get it whether you're reading a newspaper or you're turning on the TV or you're talking on the street or you're traveling or you're ordering at a restaurant. I mean, those are the words that cover 92%, and so of your daily needs. And so if you want to, for example, pass the TOEIC test, we have a 1,200 word list called the TOEIC service list, and if you study those 1,200 TOEIC words on top of our NGSL words, it's a total of 4,000 words, which is a very small number, and yet that covers 99% of the words that occur on the current version of the TOEIC test. So it's amazing. So you're getting 99% coverage, and you're passing the TOEIC test because you have this small list of words, but you're not just passing a TOEIC test that has nothing to do with the real world. That's just a test. So you pass the test, but you have those 2,800 NGSL words under your belt, so you're also doing pretty well in the real world as well. So we're doing this modular approach. So it's NGSL plus TOEIC English, NGSL plus business English, NGSL plus academic English. So NGSL is always step one, and then your special purpose domain is always step two. So it's sort of like a modular stepstone approach.
Right, I see.
So it's very pedagogic. I mean, we have a very pedagogic focus on these word lists.
I mean, I think I've been guilty of doing this in my sort of earlier teaching years when I'm going about planning a lesson and planning the vocabulary to include. It's very much kind of a grab bag. It's a bit haphazard, and there's no kind of scientific underpinning to that. How could you, or what's the process of encouraging teachers to make use of these word lists?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I speak so much. I mean, I've done conference presentations all over the world. I did a TED Talk. I mean, I do, I write. I do everything I can to get in front of teachers and convince them that the systematic development of high frequency vocabulary is a really useful, good, important goal for their students. But that said, and I think that is important, and when you can do it, that's what these lists and these tools are about, is to help you to do that. But there is also a very good role, a very important role for what you use the word haphazard. I don't think it's haphazard. I would say there's a current event. There's an article about the latest crazy thing that Donald Trump has done, and you want to bring that into the classroom. You don't want to have to teach the whole NGSL and then the whole this and that before you go in and teach that. You want to figure out what are the keywords in that article about Donald Trump, and we actually have corpus tools that help us. There's a tool on Tom Cobb's website called the Keyword Tool, and what that does is you can copy and paste your whatever your article is, the article about Trump, and you copy and paste that into the tool, hit the submit button. What it does is it compares the frequency of the words in that article with the frequency of words in what's called the Browne corpus, made in 1976, I believe, which is considered a good glimpse of standard general English. And then what it'll do, the tool instantly identifies the words that are more frequent in the Trump article than in general English, and those end up being the keywords that are very likely ones that you should pre-teach or talk about with your students. So there are actually corpus tools that can help you even for this. I wouldn't call it haphazard. I would call it immediate. The immediate needs that you have in front of you. So I think you have to do both. In the long-term view, you want to be systematically developing their knowledge of high frequency words, and I would say that some of the tools I've developed for that, like spaced repetition flashcard applications, websites devoted to that like Quizlet and Memrise. All of these are really good, efficient ways for systematically developing knowledge of high-frequency words quickly. That said, there is a minus point to that approach, and which you might have already thought about, and that is that word list learning, even from the best flashcard programs, is necessarily decontextualized. And we all, this age of communicative language teaching, don't like to do anything decontextualized. It sounds really bad. But in fact, I don't think it's bad. I think that what it needs to do is it needs to be part of a larger solution. The decontextualized learning of high-frequency words serves a very useful purpose. It helps non-native speakers who have very small vocabularies to get to the point where they at least have some knowledge of these high-frequency words in just a couple of months. You can get them to 2,800 words in 6 months to a year. And if they have at least passive receptive recognition knowledge of those 2,800 words, they're going to be able to read and listen to materials a lot more easily. That's just the starting point, though. We need contextualized learning as well, and that's why on the other side of the equation, I'm doing a lot with extensive reading and extensive listening. The great thing about extensive reading at your level, and reading a lot, that's extensive part. If you do a lot of reading, extensive reading at your level, you're getting tons and tons of contextualized learning, and everybody, there's a lot of research that points to reading, people who read a lot end up having very large vocabularies. So it's one of the chief ways that native speakers build their vocabulary is through reading. But there's a downside to extensive reading, and the downside to extensive reading is that vocabulary development is insanely slow. The research shows that in order to learn a word incidentally, where you focus on reading rather than vocabulary development, you need to be exposed to that word 25 to 30 times.
Right.
Which is, you're talking about a matter of years, not weeks or months. So extensive reading is a great long-term way to develop contextualized knowledge of vocabulary, but it's like a long-term solution. So what you do is you do them side by side. You do intensive study of high-frequency words by word lists and get that receptive knowledge up very quickly, and at the same time contextualize those words by doing extensive reading, extensive listening. And that sort of attacks 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 of the biggest problems that we have in terms of English education in Japan.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I'm talking about is this kind of symbiotic relationship between extensive reading and listening and intensive vocabulary development.
Yeah, I think I interviewed Batia Lauther.
Oh yeah, Batia. She was one of the other people that I studied under when I was doing my master's.
Yeah, she said a similar thing to you. We need, there's nothing necessarily wrong with sitting down and just looking at a vocabulary book. That can work, but it needs to work within. With other modes of learning, Well,
one of the things that we should say about Batia, for people who don't know who's listening to this podcast, is that those thresholds, those vocabulary thresholds I was talking about, 85, 90, 95%, 98%, even 99%. There's it's about 3 or 4 very important vocabulary thresholds.
Okay.
Most of the threshold research was done by Batia Lauther in the 80s and onward even to today. And so some of the very important papers on what percentage of the words do you need to be able to comprehend, that work was done by Batia Lauther. Right,
yeah. I think I also asked, this is a question I had for you a couple of minutes back, when you talk about knowledge, do you have a working definition of what you mean by knowledge? Because it seems like there's a few people tend to disagree when they say what vocabulary knowledge is. So
that's another can of worms. I actually wrote a chapter in there's a Rutledge Encyclopedia of Applied Linguistics. I wrote a whole chapter on what does it mean to know a word.
Yeah,
and
because I think some people think it means you can actively use it, and others are more you can see it in a reading and know what it means.
If you look at, there's a lot that's been written on what does it mean to know a word. I mean, Paul Nation, I think in one of his books, identifies at least 20 different aspects of word knowledge.
Wow.
And so, if you tell, what can you, do you know the meaning receptively is which what I was talking about before? Mm-hmm. Do you know how to spell it? Do you know how to pronounce it? Do you know how to use it in a sentence? Do you know its collocates? Can you, there's literally 24 different aspects of word knowledge. We often put it on a spectrum from receptive knowledge to productive knowledge.
Okay.
And most of the research would say that productive knowledge, being able to use a new word appropriately in speech or in writing, comes much later than understanding it receptively. So when I make a word list and I make flashcards, what I'm talking about is that first step over on the receptive side. And what I'm not saying, I've never said that that's the be all and the end all. That's just the starting point.
Yeah.
What I want to do is to get students to the front gate. So, my assumption is that if they have at least receptive knowledge of the most frequent 3,000 words of the English language, that's going to get them to the point where they can, access reading materials and listening materials and read. And what they'll end up doing is they'll read more and listen more. And as they get more input, as you read and listen, you end up getting the words in context, and you get exposed to the collocates, and you get exposed to the underlying grammar, and you get, as you listen more, you understand how the words are pronounced, and you understand, so the other aspects of word knowledge develop once you get more input. And you can't get more input until you get to a minimal threshold.
I see.
So the word lists and these flashcard type tools are really, getting them to the starting line. And then all of the other things are really the lifelong learning aspects of it.
I see, yeah. We talked, well, you mentioned earlier about using like a Trump article, a news article, for example. If we were to just take that article and just present it to the students without any editing, do you think it would be better to look at what the low frequency words are and maybe make a few adjustments? Or
absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, I've made tools for that. We have one of the tools Rob Waring and I have made together is called the Online Graded Text Editor, and that's a free tool that allows you to say your students know about 2,000 words. You can see all of the words that are above the 2,000 word level. In other words, low frequency difficult words. They might be colored in red or green or yellow. And you say, okay, wow, all the red and yellow and green words I've got to either take out or find a simpler a synonym or rewrite a little bit. And the Online Graded Text Editor, the OGTE, what it does is it gives you kind of a running total down at the bottom how close to 95% you are. And so it's basically designed for teachers and content developers like authors who are so that they can write with a mind to a certain level of audience. So junior high school students, they only know 800 words, so we're going to choose level 4 here, and we're going to write the materials, rewrite the materials again and again until we get to that 95% level, so that they can read without the help of a dictionary.
Yeah. So I guess like when I say like haphazard, if I type up something for my students, it's best to kind of measure that against or using these free tools.
No, there's so many of them, and they're different tools for different jobs, but it's to help you do exactly what you described. Because we do want to take current materials, and we want to take topically relevant materials to whatever the subject is, whatever students' interests are, and we want to be able to do something with it quickly. You find an article today and you want to bring it into the classroom tomorrow. Well, what do? You use some of these tools, and it helps you to identify the unknown words, and if you know your student's level, you know how close to 98% you are. There's a lot of research on things like glossing, which is the process of putting definitions for the unknown words, whether you put them in the back of a book, or you put them at the bottom of the page, or you put them at the side of the page. When you're reading like with a Kindle, you can just touch the word, and there's a lot of research to show that makes the reading process much smoother. So there's a lot of ways you can scaffold the text and make it more accessible even without simplifying it.
Right.
So there's different ways you can do it.
Yeah, I noticed, like, talking about free online resources, you tend to do a lot of conference talks where you kind of show how to kind of exploit these free tools. Can you give a few examples for maybe for both learners and the teacher of these free tools that are out there?
Well, at least with regard to my word lists, almost all of my word lists are up on a free Quizlet site.
Okay.
Quizlet.com is a great resource for learning words and learning word lists. You can upload any word list you want. You have to have the definitions. So, if you don't have definition, if you just have a word list, it's not that useful. So it's one of the first things we did when we published our word list is we spent about a year writing definitions and making those available for free as well. You can download word lists and definitions from our site, but we've already uploaded all of those word lists to Quizlet in bands of, I think, like 50 words and bands of 100 words, a couple of different formats, so that depending upon your program's needs, you can go and learn the word lists there. The nice thing about Quizlet is that it's more than just a flashcard site. There are a lot of I've made free flashcard apps for my word lists for both iPhone and Android, but it's basically just a word on one side and definition and part of speech on the other side, and that's it. Right. Quizlet goes far beyond that. I mean, Quizlet has I think 6 or 7 different functions. So for one word list, you can do like a matching game, you can do a scramble game, you can do a typical flashcard game, you can do quizzes, you can do there's one of the problems with word list is it gets boring after a while. You have to be very disciplined. The thing I like about Quizlet is that there's enough variety, and they've got elements of gamification. And by gamification, if most people know that term by now, but basically the idea of giving points, for example, or having levels, some way, as a way of motivating, taking elements of games and putting them into word learning applications, so to increase motivation. And Quizlet has a little bit of that too. Memrise is another website, MEMRISE, memrise.com, which is another flashcard site. And one of the things that they have that Quizlet doesn't is the ability for students to modify the flashcards. So if they want to add like a mnemonic device, like a story or a picture or something like that, they make it very easy to do that. And so all of my word lists are up on that website as well.
Right. Okay.
There's quite a lot out there. Those are sites for students. For teachers, there's a lot of the like the OGTE tool is one of the tools I mentioned, which is the one that helps you to look at the difficulty of reading materials. But there's quite a lot. I think I briefly mentioned another tool by Tom Cobb called Keyword Tool, which compares the text to the Browne corpus. That's another very good tool. There's all kinds. I would say that if you want all of the tools, the two best places I think for corpus-based tools for teachers and researchers, one is called the Complete Lexical Tutor by Tom Cobb.
Okay.
And there's probably, I would say, 25 or 30 tools. It's almost too much. And there's just tremendous amount of resources there. And a lot of my workshops are basically just teaching students and teachers and master's students, how to use those tools.
Right. Okay.
And that's a great resource. But it's a little bit, like maybe old school in terms of the look and feel of the browsers and the tools themselves. There's another. It's not less a website than it is a person, but Lawrence Anthony out at Waseda University.
Oh, he's also in Japan.
Lawrence is a corpus linguist and a programmer, and he's programmed all of these tools himself. He's got tremendous tools if you want to dig a little deeper into corpus linguistics, and that's a great. He always builds for every tool that he's built. He builds a version for Apple, a version for Windows, and a version for Linux.
Right.
So if you just do like Ant Word Profiler is his version of what Rob and our OGTE tool is, and Tom Cobb has something called Vocab Profile. So all three of them are doing similar things, but they have slightly different focuses. Ours is more focused on the needs of teachers and content developers, and Tom Cobb's Vocab Profile and Lawrence Anthony's Ant Word Profilers is more focused on the needs of researchers.
I see. Yeah.
And they're each of them has their own strengths, and they're all very good. Very good.
Perhaps just one final question, if I may. One of the things I teach on a course where we almost insist on our learners to do their own self-study outside of class and report what they're doing to us. And I often find myself telling students, don't just do something for this because I'm telling you to do it. I want you to select something that's of importance to you. And a couple of other learners that I have say that they're not interested in reading because some of the graded readers available to them are not that interesting.
Right.
So, I mean, how would you advise me to advise my students in terms of self-access?
I've worked for the Extensive Reading Foundation, ERF, for a couple of years, sometimes as a judge. For they rate they give awards for the best new graded readers, and so I've had to read literally hundreds of graded readers, and I come away with the same impression that your students have, and that is that some of the graded readers are not that interesting, and some of them, but on the other hand, some of them are great. And so there are a couple of ways around it. I mean, it's really clear that students need, especially Japanese students, they do need graded reading materials because they're just not at the level where they can read on simplified. And if they're continually exposed to materials way above their level, they lose their confidence, they lose their motivation, and they start hating English. So we got to get them while they're junior high and senior high students and give them materials that are level appropriate. And what the easy solution, if you have a budget, is to buy every graded material there is, and then set up at Meiji Gakuin we have a graded reading library of about 4,000 or 5,000 books.
Okay, right. Wow.
One of the problems is that all of the publishers have their own leveling system, so it's not it's not that easy. So if you go on the ERF site, one of Rob's best contributions, I think, is that he created what's called the ERF scale, and it puts all of the publishers' materials from on one scale.
Okay.
And so you can look at that scale and then set up like a color-coded system in your library and put everything that's on level 6. No matter what it's called on the publisher's book, you put a little green label on that, and then you have like sort of a system for your students to go through. Yeah. And then the rules that we have for graded reading are pretty much the rules that the golden rules of graded reading are: read at your level, read materials that are interesting to you, and if you lose interest in a book, just put it down and get a different one. And so if you sort of have students approach it that way, and go to the library and pick up a book that looks like it might be interesting, and then try reading it. If they don't like it, then just put it right back and get another one. That's something they can do. If you don't have the luxury of buying 4,000 or 5,000 books, then there are like, for example, the Yomi Yasusa grading system of rating system for graded reading materials sort of gives students reactions to the graded reading materials, and you as a teacher can sort of pick and choose the ones that have the highest ratings by Japanese students, and just pick those. Yet another way is another friend of mine, Paul Goldberg, has an online graded reading system called X Reading, and what he's done is he's made deals with a whole range of different publishers and gotten all of those books onto an online reading system. So it makes it easier for students to, for like one, I don't know what the price is, but I think it's not that expensive. But then they have, for one access fee, they have literally access to thousands of books, and they can this is not interesting. They put it back, and it's on their cell phone. So there's that, and then I would say, also, as a teacher, what you can do is you can just once you know their level, you can use some of these free online tools that I was talking about, like the OGTE, and just do really quick reading of materials, current materials that you think might be of interest to your students. You figure out what your students' interests are, and then start pulling materials, modifying, or just finding stuff that's at the right level and making those available as well. So there's a lot of different ways. There's also materials made for first language learners. A growing number of first language reading materials are made at in a graded way. Looking not only to publishers of EFL materials like Cambridge and Oxford and Pearson and Cengage, but looking more towards mainstream L1 publishers, and looking for the stuff that they've made for children and teenagers and young adults, and looking for stuff that's graded in a similar way. So there are a number of things you can do.
So it seems like there's lots of options. Seems a bit overwhelming.
No, it's but the results are are very good. And I think that when you look at high schools that are doing graded reading seriously, students, ability level, their satisfaction rate, their motivation, their confidence, all are through the roof. Better than schools that are not doing it.
Right,
so
right. Yeah,
it's addressing some of those problems I was talking about at the very beginning, where I was looking at the textbooks and seeing these really, really difficult words and the reading material and the grammar way above their level, and I knew it was causing problems in motivation and confidence and so on. And the graded reading materials are addressing that very problem. You read a book at your level, you build a little confidence, and that increases your motivation. So you read more, and as you read more, you get more vocabulary, so you get that positive spiral going. So I think the combination of carefully selected word lists, reading materials based on those word lists, getting them in front of graded reading and listening materials, and slowly systematically building their knowledge of general and special purpose vocabulary, it really does help Japanese students exactly where they're hurting the most.
Okay. So I guess we've kind of come full circle then. We kind of see how vocabulary relates to the wider educational setting, I guess. Okay, so perhaps we'll end it there. Charlie, thanks a lot for today.
Oh, thanks a lot. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks to Dr. Charlie Browne for sitting down and talking with us. As always, we would love to hear from you, and you can contact us through email at TEFLology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter @TEFLology, and we have a Facebook page. We also have a website, TEFLology-podcast.com, where you can find all of our previous episodes. Thank you very much, and we'll be back soon with a regular episode. Goodbye.